Welcome, everybody, back to Among the Night People. And I'm going to put on my glasses here, and we are going to read the second chapter called The Naughty Raccoon Children. There was hardly a night of his life when the little brother of the raccoon family was not reproved by his mother for teasing. Mrs. Raccoon said she didn't know what she had done to deserve such a child. When she spoke like this to her neighbors, they sighed and said, it must be trying, but they may grow out of it. Excuse me. The oldest Wolverine, though, told the skunk that his cousin, Mrs. Raccoon's husband, had been just as bad as that when he was young. Oh, I do not want to say that, but he whispered, because he might hear of it and be angry, but it is true. The oldest Wolverine didn't say whether Mr. Raccoon outgrew this bad habit, yet it would seem that his wife had never noticed it. You must not think that Mr. Raccoon was dead. Oh, no, indeed. Every night he was prowling through the forest on tiptoe, looking for food. But Mrs. Raccoon was a very devoted mother and gave so much time and attention to her children that she was not good company for her husband. He did not care much for home life, and the children annoyed him exceedingly. So he went away and found himself a hole in another tree, which he fitted up for himself. There he slept through the day and until the setting of the sun told him that it was time for his breakfast. Raccoons like company, and he often had friends to sleep with him. Sometimes these friends were raccoons like themselves, with wives and with children, and then they would talk about their families and tell how they thought their wives were spoiling those children. The four little raccoons who lived with their mother in the dead branch of the big oak tree had been born in April, when the forest was sweet with the scent of wild violets and everyone was happy. Beautiful pink and white trilliums raised their three-cornered flowers above their threefold leaves and nodded with every passing breeze. Yellow adder-tongue was there, with crane's bill geraniums, squirrel corn, and spring beauties, besides hepatacea and wildflowers and the dainty bishop's cap. The young raccoons did not see these things, for their eyes would not work well by daylight. And when, after dark, their mother let them put their heads out the hole and look around, they were too far from the ground to see the flowers sleeping in the dusk below. They could only sniff, 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 sniff with their sharp little turned up noses and wonder what flowers look like anyway. When their mother was with them for a time, and that was while they were drinking the warm milk that she always carried for them, she told them stories of the flowers and trees. She had begun by telling them animal stories, but she found that it made them cowardly. Just supposing, one young raccoon had said, a great big dreadful snail should come up this tree and eat us all. The mother told them that snails were small and slow and weak and never climbed trees or ate people. But it did no good, and her children were always afraid of snails until they had seen one for themselves. After that, she told them stories of the flowers. And when they asked if the flowers would ever come to see them, she says, no, indeed. You will never see them until you can climb down the tree and walk among them, for they grow with their feet in the ground. They never go anywhere. There were many stories which they wanted over and over again, but the one they liked best of all was that about the wicked, wicked poison ivy and the gentle spotted touch-me-not who grew near him and undid all the terrible thing that the ivy made. When the night came for the young raccoons to climb down from their tree and learn to hunt, All the early spring blossoms were gone, and only the ripening seed vessels showed where nodding flowers had been. You would have expected the raccoon children to be disappointed, yet there were so many other things to see and learn about that it was not until 3 nights later that they thought much about the flowers. They might not have done so then if little sister had not lost her hold upon the oak tree bark and fallen from her forepaws on a scarlet jack-in-the-pulpit berry. They had to learn to climb quickly and strongly up all sorts of trees. Perhaps Mrs. Raccoon had chosen an oak for her nest because that was rough and easily climbed. There were many good places for raccoons to grip with their 20 strong claws apiece. After they had learned oak, they took maples, ironwoods, and beeches, each a harder lesson than the one before. When you climb a tree, said the mother, always look over the trunk and the largest branches for hiding places, whether you want to use one or not. Why? Asked 3 of the 4 children. Big Brother, who was rather vain, was looking at the 5 beautiful black rings and the beautiful black tip of his wonderfully bushy tail. Between the black rings were whitish ones, and he thought such things much more interesting than the holes in trees. Because, said the mother raccoon, you may be far from home some night and want a safe place to sleep in all day. Or if a man and his dogs are chasing you, you must climb into the first hidey-hole place you can. We raccoons are too fat and slow to run away from them, and the rings on our tails and the black patches on our broad faces might show from the ground. If the hole is a small one, make it cover your head and your tail always, and as much of your brown body fur as you can. Mother Raccoon looked sternly at Big Brother because he had not been listening, and he gave a slight jump when asked, "Well, what did you say?" "What did I say?" she replied. "You should have paid better attention." Yes, ma'am," said Big Brother, who was now very meek. "I shall not repeat it," said his mother, "but I will tell you not to grow vain of your fur. It is very handsome, and so is that of your sisters and that of your brother. So is mine. So is your father's the last time I saw him. Yet nearly all the trouble that raccoons have is on account of their fur. Never try to show it off." The time came for the young raccoons to stop drinking milk from their mother's body, and when they tried to do so, she only walked away from them. "I cannot work so hard to care for you," said she. "I am so tired and thin now that my skin is loose, and you must find your own food. You are getting 40 fine teeth apiece, and I never saw a better lot of claws on any raccoon family, if I do say so." They used to go hunting together, for it is the custom for raccoons to go in parties of from 4 to 8 to hunt all night and then hide somewhere until the next night. They did not always come home at sunrise, and it made a pleasant change to sleep in different trees. One day they all cuddled down into the hollow of an old maple just below where the branches came out. Mother Raccoon had climbed the tree first and was curled away in the very bottom of the hole. The 4 children were not tired and hadn't wanted to go to bed at all. Little sister had made a dreadful face when her mother called her up the tree, and if it had not already been growing light, Mrs. Raccoon would probably have seen it and punished her. Big sister curled down beside her mother, and little sister was rather above them, and besides, little mischievous little brother. Last of all came Big Brother, who had stopped to scratch his ear with his hind foot. Oh, he was very proud of his little round ears, and often scratched them in this way to make sure that the fur lay straight on them. He was so slow in reaching the hole that before he got into it, a robin had begun his morning song of cheerily, cheerily, cheer up, and a chipmunk perched on a stump to make his morning toilet. He got all settled and little brother was half asleep beside him when he remembered his tail and sat up to have one more good look at it. Little brother growled sleepily and told him to let his old tail alone and come to bed as long as they couldn't hunt any more. But Big Brother thought he saw a sand burr on his tail and wanted to pull it out before it hurt his fur. Then he began to look at the bare, tough pads on his feet and to notice how finely he could spread his toes. Those of his front feet he could spread more easily and especially wide. He balanced himself on the edge of the hole and held them spread out before him. It was still dark enough for him to see well. "Hey, come here, little brother," he cried. "Wake up and see how big my feet are getting." Well, Mrs. Raccoon growled at them to be good children to just go to sleep already. But her voice sounded dreamy and far away because she had to talk through part of her own fur and most of her daughters'. Little brother lost his patience, unrolled himself with a spring, jumped to the opening, and knocked his brother down. Ugh, it was dreadful. Of course, Big Brother was not much hurt, for he was very fat, and his fur was both long and thick. But he turned over and over on his way to the ground before he alighted on his feet. He turned so fast and little brother's eyes hurt him so that it looked as though Big Brother had about 3 heads, 3 tails, and 12 feet. He called out as he fell, and that awakened the sisters, who began to cry, of course, and Mrs. Raccoon, who was so scared that she began to just scold. Such a time! Mother Raccoon found out what had happened, and then she said to little brother, "Did you mean to push him down?" "No, ma'am," answered little brother, hanging his head. "Anyhow, I didn't mean to after I saw him going. Perhaps I did mean to before that." You see, he was a truthful raccoon, even when he was most naughty. And there is always hope for a raccoon who will tell the truth, no matter how hard it is to do so. Big Brother climbed slowly up the trunk of the oak tree, while more and more of the daytime people came to look at him. He could not see well now and was so very awkward. When he reached the hole, he was hot and cross and complained to his mother. "Make him quit teasing me," he said, pointing one forepaw at little brother. "I will," answered Mother Raccoon, "but you are just as much to blame as he. For if you had cuddled down quietly when I told you to, you would have been dreaming long ago. Now you must sleep where I was, at the bottom and at the lower end of the hole. Little brother must go in next, and I don't want to hear one word from either of you. Sisters next, and I will sleep by the opening. You children must remember that it is no time for talking to each other or looking at claws or getting sand burrs out of your tails after you have been sent to bed. Now go to sleep and don't awake until the sun has gone down and you are ready to be my good little raccoons again." Her children were asleep long before she was, and she talked softly to herself after they were dreaming. "Oh, they don't mean to be naughty," she said. "Yet it makes my fur stand on end to think what might have happened. I ought not to have curled up for the day until they had gone so too. Mother should always be at the top of the heap." Then she fixed herself for a long, restful day's sleep. All right. Well, we are going to read another story, and it's called The Little Groundhog. Do they have groundhogs where you live? I don't believe I've ever seen a groundhog in real life. We certainly don't have groundhogs where I live. So that is very interesting to me. All right, here we go. The Timid Little Groundhog. It was not often that the little groundhogs were left alone in the daytime. Before they were born, their mother had been heard to say that she had her opinion of any groundhog who would be seen out after sunrise. Mr. Groundhog felt the exact same way and said if he ever got to running around by daylight, like some of his relatives, people might call him a woodchuck. He thought that anyone who ate twigs, beets, turnips, young tree bark, and other green things from sunset to sunrise ought to be able to get along until the next sunset without a lunch. He said that any groundhog who wanted more was a pig. After the baby groundhogs were born, matters were different. They could not go out at night to feed for themselves, and their stomachs were so tiny and held so little at a time that they had to be filled very often. Mr. Groundhog was never at home now, and the care all fell upon his hard-working wife. "You know, my dear," he had said to her, "that I should only be in the way if I were to stay at home, for I am not clever and patient with children as you are. No, I think I will go away and see to some matters which I have rather neglected of late. When the children are grown up and you have more time to give me, I will come back to you." Then Mr. Groundhog trotted away to join a party of his friends who had just told their wives something of the same sort, and they all went together to the farmer's turnip patch and had a delightful time until morning. Mrs. Groundhog looked after him as he trotted away and wished, oh, she wished she could go too. He looked so handsome He looked so handsome with the moonlight shining down on his long, thick, reddish fur and showing the black streak on his back where the fur was tipped with gray. He was fat and shaky with a baggy skin, and when he stopped to sit up on his haunches and wave his paws at her and comb his fur face, oh, she thought him just as handsome as he had been in the early spring when they first met. That had been in a parsnip patch where there was good feeding until the farmer found that the groundhogs were there and dug the rest of his vegetables and stored them in the cellar. Such midnight meals as they had eaten there together! Mrs. Groundhog said she never saw a parsnip afterwards without thinking of their courtship. She had been as handsome as he, and there were many other groundhogs who admired her. But now she was thin and did not have many chances to comb her fur with her forepaws. She could not go with him to the turnip patch because she did not wish to go so far from her babies. Thinking of that reminded her to go into her side hill burrow and see what they were doing. Then she lay down and let them draw the warm milk from her body. While they were feeding, she felt on them and thought how fast they were growing. It would be only a short time before they could trot around the fields by themselves and whistle shrilly as they dodged down into their own burrows. "Ah," said she, "this is better than turnip patches or even parsnips." When they had finished, their mother left them and went out to feed. She had always been a hearty eater, but now she had to eat enough and more to make the milk for her babies. She often thought that if groundhog babies could eat anything else, their father might have learned to help feed them. She thought of this especially when she saw the great horned owl carrying food home to his son and to his daughter. "Oh, it is what comes of being four-legged," she said, "and I wouldn't be an owl for anything, so I'm just not going to grumble." And after this she was more cheerful. When she left the burrow, she always said, "I'm going out to feed, and I shall not be gone very long. Don't be afraid, for you have a good burrow, and it's nice and dark outside." And the children would cry, "And you will surely come home before sunrise?" Surely, she always answered as she trotted away. Then the children would rest happily in their burrow nest. But now Mrs. Groundhog was hungry, and it was broad daylight. She knew that it was because her children grew bigger every day and had to have more and more milk. This meant that she must eat more, or else when they wanted more milk, there would not be enough ready. She knew that she must begin to feed by day as well as by night, and she was glad that she could see fairly well enough if the sun were not shining into her eyes. Children, she said to them just as they finished their morning lunch, I am very hungry and I'm going out to feed. You will be quite safe here, and I want you to be good while I'm gone. The young groundhogs began to cry and clutch at their fur with their little weak paws. Oh, don't go, they said. Please don't go. We don't want to stay home alone in the daytime. We're afraid. I must, said she, or I shall have no milk for you. And then you wouldn't have me to lie here all day too hungry to sleep, would you? No, they said, but you'll come back soon, won't you? Yes, said she, and she shook off their clinging paws and poked back the daughter, who caught on again and trotted away as fast as she could. It was the first time that she had been out by daylight, and everything looked queer. The colors looked too bright, and there seemed to be more noise than usual, and she met several people whom she had never seen before. She stopped for a minute to look at an ovenbird's nest. The mother bird was inside, sitting there very still and brave, although she was much frightened. Good morning, said Mrs. Groundhog. I was just admiring your nest. I have never seen it by daylight. Good morning, answered the ovenbird. I'm glad you fancy my nest, but I hope you don't like to eat meat. Meat? Answered Mrs. Groundhog. Oh, I never touch it. And she smiled and showed all her teeth. Oh, exclaimed the ovenbird, I see you don't, for you have gnawing teeth rather like those of the rabbits. Then she hopped out of the nest and let Mrs. Groundhog peep in to see how the inside was finished, and also to see the 4 speckled eggs which lay there. Oh, what a lovely nest, said Mrs. Groundhog, and those eggs are beauties. But I promised the children that I would hurry. Goodbye. She trotted happily away while Mrs. Ovenbird settled herself upon her eggs again and thought what a pleasant call she had had, and what an excellent and intelligent person Mrs. Groundhog was. All this time the children at home were talking together about themselves and what their mother had told them. Once there was a long pause, which lasted until the brother said, I'm not afraid. Are you? Of course not, said they, because there isn't anything to be afraid of, said he. No, not anything, said they. And I don't think I would be afraid anyways, said he. Neither would we, answered the sisters, and there was a long pause. She said we'd be safe as if it were dark, said the big sister. Oh, right, of course, said the brother. And she said she'd come back as soon as she could, said the second sister. Oh, I wish she'd come back now, said the smallest sister. There was another long pause. You don't suppose anybody would come here just to scare us, do you? Asked the second sister. See here, said the brother, I wish you'd quit saying things to make a fellow afraid. You don't mean that you are frightened, exclaimed the 3 sisters together, and the smallest one added, Why, you are too. I can feel you trembling. I don't care, said the brother. I'm not afraid of people anyhow. If it were only dark, I wouldn't mind. Oh, are you afraid of the daylight too? Cried each of the sisters. Well, so am I. Then they all trembled together. I tell you what let's do, said the smallest sister. Let's all stop looking towards the light end of the burrow and cuddle up together and cover our eyes and make believe it's night. They said this and felt better. They even played that they heard the few noises of the nighttime. A crow cawed outside, and Brother said, Did you hear that owl? That was the great horned owl, the one who had to hatch the eggs, you remember? When another crow cawed, the smallest sister said, Was that his cousin, the screech owl? Yes, answered his big sister. He is the one who used to bring things for the great horned owl to eat. And so they amused themselves and each other and really got along very well, except when, once in a while, they opened their eyes a little crack to see if it were not getting really dark. Then they had to begin all over again. At last their mother came, and what a comfort it was. How glad she was to be back, and how much she had to tell them. All about the ovenbird's nest and the 4 eggs in it, and how the ovenbirds spent their nights in sleeping and their days in work and play. I wonder if the little ovenbirds will be scared when they have to stay alone in the daytime, said the smallest sisters. They would be more scared if they had to stay alone at night, said their mother. At night? Why, it's dark at night. They might be afraid of the darkness, said their mother. Then the children laughed and thought she was making fun of them. They drank some milk and went to sleep like good little groundhogs, but even after he was half asleep, the big brother laughed out loud at the thought of the ovenbird babies being scared at night. He could understand anyone being afraid of daylight, but darkness? The end of that one. Wow, it's funny to turn our minds to the to think about how we feel at night, maybe. And there are animals that love the nighttime. That is so fun. We are going to read another one. And remember, you can always stop the video and come back later and listen to the next story if you want. But we're going to go on to the next one. And this one's kind of fun for me. I like this one. And it's called The Young Raccoons Go to a Party. It was not very many nights after Big Brother had tumbled from the maple tree when he and the other children were invited to a raccoon party down by the pond. The water was low, and in the small pools by the shore there were many freshwater clams and small fishes, such as raccoons like best of all. A family of 6 young raccoons who lived very near the pond had found them just before sunrise, when they had to climb off to bed. They knew there was much more food there than they could eat alone, so their mother had let them invite their 4 friends who lived in the hollow of the oak tree. The party was to begin the next evening at moonrise, and the 4 children who lived in the oak tree got their invitation just as they were going to sleep for the day. They were very much excited over it, for they had never been to a party. I wish we could go now, said Big Brother. Oh, yes, lots of fun it would be now, answered Little Brother. The sun is almost up, and there are no clouds in the sky. We couldn't see a thing unless we shaded our eyes with our 4 paws, and if we had to use our 4 paws in that way, we wouldn't be able to eat anything. Do you eat at parties? You do, don't you? Asked Little Sister, who had not quite understood what was said. Of course, shouted her brothers. "That is what parties are for." "Oh, I thought maybe you talked some," said Big Sister. "Uh, I suppose you have to do some," said Big Brother. "But I know you eat. I've heard people tell some parties lots of times, and they always began by telling what they ate. That's what makes it a party." "Oh, I wish it were night and time to go," sighed Little Brother. "I don't," said Little Sister. "I wouldn't have any fun if I were to go now. I'd rather wait until my stomach is empty." "There," said their mother. "You children have talked long enough. Now curl down and go to sleep. The birds are already singing their morning songs, and the owls and bats are dreaming long ago. It will make nighttime come much sooner if you do not stay awake." "We're not really sleepy," cried all the young raccoons together. "Hey, that makes no difference at all," said their mother, and she spoke quite sternly. "Now, you cuddle down for the day now. You cover your eyes and stop talking. I do not say you must fall asleep, but you must stop talking." They knew that when she spoke in that way and said must, there was nothing to do but to mind. So they cuddled down, and every one of them was asleep before you could drop an acorn. Mother Raccoon had known it would be so. When they awakened early the next night, each young raccoon had to make himself look as neat as possible. There were long fur to be combed, faces and paws to be washed, and 23 burrs to be taken out of Little Brother's tail. He began to take them out himself, but his mother found that whenever he got one loose, he stuck it into one of the other children. So she scolded him and made him sit on a branch by himself while she worked at the burrs. Sometimes she couldn't help pulling the fur, and then he tried to wiggle away. "You've got enough out," he cried. "Let the rest go." "You should have thought sooner how it would hurt," she said. "You have been told again and again to keep away from the burrs, and you are just as careless as you were the first night you left the tree." Then she took out another burr and dropped it to the ground. "Ouch!" he said. "Let me go." "Not until I am done," she answered. "No child of mine shall ever go to a party looking as you do." After that, Little Brother tried to hold still, and he had time to think how glad he was that he hadn't stuck any more burrs on the other children. If he had gotten more onto them, he would have had to wait while they were pulled off again, and then they might have been late for the party. If he had been very good, he would have been glad they didn't have to be hurt as he was. But he was not very good, and he never thought of that. When he was ready at last, Mother Raccoon made her 4 children sit in a row while she talked to them. "Remember to walk on your toes," she said, "although you may stand flat-footed if you wish. Don't act greedy if you can help it. Go into the water as much as you choose, but don't try to dive, even if they dare you to do it. Raccoons can never learn to dive, no matter how well they swim. And be sure to wash your food before you eat it." All the young raccoons said, "Yes'm," and thought that they would remember every single word. The first moonbeam shone on the top of the oak tree, and Mrs. Raccoon said, "Now you may go. Be good children, and remember what I told you. Don't stay too long. Start home when you see the first light in the east." "Yes'm," said the young raccoons as they walked off very properly towards the pond. After they were well away from the oak tree, they heard their mother calling to them, "Remember to walk on your toes." Raccoons cannot go very fast, and the moon was shining brightly when they reached the pond and met their 6 friends. Such frolics as they had in the shallow water, swimming and twisting, turning, scooping up food with their busy 4 paws, going up and down the beach and rolling on the sand. They never once remembered what their mother had told them, not once. And they acted exactly as they had been in the habit of doing every day. Big Brother looked admiringly at his own tail every chance he got, although he had been told particularly not to act as if he thought himself fine looking. Little Brother rolled into a lot of sandburrs and got his fur so matted that he looked worse than ever. Big Sister snatched food from other raccoons, and not one of them remembered about walking on tiptoes. Little Sister ate half the time without washing her food. Of course, that didn't matter when the food was taken from the pond, but when they found some on the beach and ate it without washing, oh, that was dreadful. No raccoon who is anybody at all will do that. The mother of the family of 6 looked on from a tree nearby. The children did not know that she was there. "Oh, what manners," she said. "I shall never have them invited here again." Just then she saw one of her own sons eat without washing his food, and she groaned out loud, "My children are forgetting too. I have told him hundreds of times that if he did that every day, he would do so at a party. But he has always said he would remember." The mother of the 4 raccoons was out hunting and found herself near the pond. "How noisy those children are," she said to herself. "Night people should be quiet." She tiptoed along to a pile of rocks and peeped between them to see what was going on, and she saw her children's footprints on the sand. "Aha!" she said. "So they did walk flat-footed after all." She heard somebody scrambling down a tree nearby. "Good morning," said a pleasant raccoon voice near her. It was the mother of the 6. "Are you watching the children's party?" asked the newcomer. "I hope you did not notice how badly my son is behaving. I have tried to teach my children good manners, but they will be careless when I am not looking, and then, of course, they forget in company." Well, that made the mother of the 4 feel more comfortable. "Oh, I know just how that is," she said. "Mine mean to be good, but they are so careless. It's very discouraging." The 2 mothers talked for a long time in whispers, and then each went to her own hole. When the 4 young raccoons came home, it was beginning to grow light, and they kept close together because they were somewhat afraid. Their mother was waiting to see them settled for the day. She asked if they had a good time, and she was glad they got home promptly. They had been afraid she would ask if they were washing their food, and had they walked on their tiptoes. She even seemed not to notice Little Brother's matted coat. And when they awakened the next night, the mother hurried them off with her to the same pond where they had been to the party. "I am just going to go visit the mother of your friends," she said, "and you may play around and amuse yourselves." The young raccoons had another fine time, although Little Brother found it very uncomfortable to wear so many burrs. They played tag in the trees, they ate, they swam, and lay on the beach. While they were laying there on the beach, the 4 from the oak tree noticed, that their mother was walking flat-footed. There was bright moonlight, and everybody might see her. They felt dreadfully about it. Then they saw her begin to eat food which she had not washed. Oh my goodness, they were so ashamed that they didn't want to look their friends in the eye. They didn't know that the friends were feeling in the same way because they had seen their mother doing ill-mannered things that day too. After they reached home, Big Brother said very timidly to his mother, "Did you know you ate some food without washing it?" "Oh, yes," she answered. "It is such a bother to dip it in all that water. And you walk flat-footed, said little brother. Well, why shouldn't I if I want to? She said. The children began to cry. People will think you don't know any better, they said. We were dreadfully ashamed. Oh, said their mother. Oh, so you think that my manners are not so good as yours? Is that it? The young raccoons looked at each other in a very uncomfortable way. We suppose we don't always do things right ourselves, they answered. But you're the grown up. Yes, replied their mother, and you will be too someday. And for a long time nobody spoke, and little sister sobbed out loud. Then Mrs. Raccoon spoke more gently. The sun is rising, she said. We will go to sleep now, and when we awaken tomorrow night, we will try to have better manners, so that we need not be ashamed of each other at parties or at home. Long after the rest were dreaming, Big Sister nudged Big Brother and awakened him. Oh, I understand it now, she said. She did it on purpose. Who did what? He asked. Why, our mother. She was rude on purpose to let us see how it looked. Big Brother thought for a minute. Oh, yes, of course. Of course she did. Well, she won't ever do it again for me. Not for me, said Big Sister. And then they went to sleep. And I'm sorry, that last part was, he said, oh, of course, she won't ever have to do it again for me. And Big Sister said, nor for me. And then they went to sleep. Sorry, I kind of messed that up there at the end. All right, we are at almost 45 minutes. And I'm sure you guys have so many things to do. I hope you are enjoying Among the Night People. And we will see each other soon for 3 more stories. And it sounds like it's going to be fun. So we will read and see each other later.